All right, this is Dark Horse Chapter 12. Arnold Swenson strode into his Manhattan office, 565 Fifth Avenue, on the stroke of 7 o'clock the next morning. The nation's most skillful, secretive, and expensive conductor of political polls switched on the lights, hung his coat on a hall tree, and pushed a button on the electric coffee maker. Unlike many early morning toilers in New York that morning, Swenson was eager to begin work. He was a large, solid man, built as though to provide a model anchor for less stable humans, and his bald head glowed above a fringe of neatly trimmed graying hair. Swenson smiled but rarely, finding life a serious transit which, as far as he knew, afforded but one crossing per person and therefore was not to be taken lightly or frittered away on emotional yo-yos and frisbees. What fascinated him and made his life a monolith of purpose was his belief in the utter predictability of human behavior, including his own. Swenson had risen an hour earlier with a sense of expectation that quickened as he clicked through his morning routine, toothbrushing and gum massage, mouthwash, shower, shave, dressing, breakfast, page one of the New York Times, elimination and the vigorous 9-block walk to the office. His mind dwelled on those two lines transmuted from neat rows of numbers that ran toward each other with steady, unbending insistence. He found great beauty in those lines, a mirroring of truth as precise as Ralston Crawford's painting of a long hallway bridge in which the railings, converging in perspective, became at last a remote pinpoint. Swenson had remained flexible and open-minded for a week, but last night he had glimpsed the shape of some things to come, and he looked forward to the morning with such eagerness that he gladly would have foregone his sleep if that would have speeded events. As it was, he slept soundly and dreamed of a series of geometric designs in gorgeous colors that slid into one another in endless progression approaching the infinite. Arnold Swenson ran the most sophisticated poll in the world, and this October it would be at the exclusive service of Governor Hugh Penholster under high security precautions at a cost of $28,000 a day. This broke down to $14 per interview for each 24 hours. Swenson's organization questioned 2,000 people across the nation. All polling was done by telephone, although the results were carefully weighted by a complex formula to account for those voters who had no home phone. 140 interviewers operating in 2 shifts of 70 each manned the phones in a little compartment spread along tables in a Lexington Avenue office building in Manhattan. The dialing crews consisted largely of graduate students of the social sciences at New York universities, supplemented by a few housewives and unemployed professional people. They were paid $50 an hour for an 8-hour shift, but most of them were as interested in public opinion sampling techniques as in the money. Calls fanned out over the Bell System's WATS, Wide Area Telephone Service, lines affording unlimited long-distance calls at a fixed monthly rental. Every call resulted from a random selection of phone number by a computer that performed highly complicated calculations, including the allotment of a higher percentage of calls in those area codes located in states with the largest electoral votes. The computer juggled area codes, exchanges, and final 4-digit numbers with lightning speed, serving up long lists of random numbers for each operator. Interviewers also followed a booklet of questions designed to reflect the voting population's profile in such items as correct proportion of males and females, heads of household, first-time voters, elderly citizens, and, of top importance, those most likely to vote. The calling began every morning at 10 o'clock and continued until 2 the next morning. While no call entered a home after 11 p.m. local time, the New York dialers worked until 2 a.m. because of the 3-hour time spread to the West Coast. Operators sprinkled calls to time-distant Hawaii and Alaska through the day. Operators wasted 2 of every 3 calls because the computer selection ran random numbers, included phone booths, churches, schools, and business establishments. With few exceptions, those reached at a home could operate willingly. They liked being called long distance, appreciated the thoroughness of the questioning, and above all relished the thought that their single vote was significant enough to attract the interest of a professional poller. Dialers filled out coded forms after each interview, and supervisors transferred the data to punch cards. Twice a day, figures from mechanical tabulators were fed into a computer console. Instantly, rows of figures clattered onto a long sheet that leapt convulsively from the electric typewriter. A bonded security officer folded the sheet, placed it in a thick manila envelope, put the envelope in his inner breast pocket, and walked rapidly the 5 blocks to Swenson's Fifth Avenue office, arriving each morning and evening at 7:15. The morning Swenson glanced repeatedly at his watch this morning Swenson glanced repeatedly at his watch as he awaited arrival of the messenger. He drank coffee, filled his pipe, relighting it several times, and looked out the window without seeing anything. At last, 2 minutes late at 7:17, the young messenger came into the office and waited while Swenson signed for the delivery. Opening the envelope and unfolding the sheet, which was 18 inches wide and perhaps 6 feet in length, Swenson became conscious of his tension. His stomach, that emotional refuse dump, groaned as a new load of cans, bottles, cartons, and other sensory discards tumbled about. If he was certain of what he would find, he thought, why so discombobulated? He scanned the rows of figures with rising excitement, noting a number here and another there as his vision hopped around the sheet. Then suddenly a glow suffused his body and the tension drained away. He was right. The figures confirmed his hunch as accurately as if they had been hatched in his own brain. But first, the precaution of a double check. He telephoned Fred, his morning supervisor in the Lexington Avenue bucket shop of polling. "Did you eyeball those key numbers on the dupe, Fred?" "Yep. They're okay, Arnold. They check out with the input. No problem with the 904 this morning. All nice and tidy." "Fine. I'll be over around 10. Swenson took a large sheet of graph paper from his desk drawer and glanced at the 2 lines, one red and one blue, that ran across the graph. Consulting numbers on the computer printout, he used a blue pencil to extend the blue line about half an inch, then duplicated the process with a red pencil and the red line. Finally, using an ordinary lead pencil and ruler, he extended both lines by a series of light dots and wrote down 2 letters and a number in a corner of the graph. T-N squared. Perfect, Swenson breathed the word with awe. He might have been Christopher Columbus, sighting the low tropical shoreline of Walting Island in the Bahamas, or Hiram Bingham beholding the long-hidden glories of the lost Inca forest, Machu Picchu, in the Andes of Peru. For all 3 men, Chris, he, and Arnie, there were the supreme vault of the human spirit, that vindication of lonely prescience. By God, they had been right. Swenson glanced at his watch. 7:28. He could call Hugh Penholster in 2 minutes, and he would use those 2 minutes planning just how to break the news. Swenson's relationship with his most recent client had been sealed when he began polling in the Penholster-Hudson race in late September. A man with Swenson's record of prestige could set his own terms. In the last quarter of a century, he had polled in more than 400 political contests, including every presidential race, and a host of battles for governor, senator, and mayor. He had picked wrong only once, missing a run for governor of Missouri largely because the client refused to pay what Swenson considered to be an adequate sample. His highest error had been 4.7%, his average error 1.2%, but in presidential elections the last pre-voting figures averaged slightly less than 0.4% off the mark. Swenson had polled for such notables as Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Rockefeller. Although his price was steep, expenses were also lofty, as Swenson netted only about $300 a day of profit for himself the short-lived political polling season. He made his living from market surveys. In politics, he was a man who worshipped numbers and their meaning for election day. Swenson insisted on certain rules. He would communicate only with the candidate himself. With Penholster, he had an arrangement that he could call the governor at 7:30 a.m. each day wherever Penholster happened to be. The client pledged not to reveal figures except to a few close trusted advisors. Under no conditions were poll results to be leaked to the press. Thus, when the Los Angeles Times printed Swenson data Wednesday, Swenson had threatened to end his service unless Penholster tightened his security. The candidate vowed that henceforth he would hold the daily results as inviolable as his campaign promises, a somewhat ambiguous pledge, Swenson thought. Actually, Swenson traced the leak to his own shop and fired the offending assistant supervisor. Arnold Swenson could so dictate to future presidents because of all the new high priests in modern America, the diet druids, the sensitivity gurus, Zen Buddhist mystics, Satan cultists, ecology zealots, and the chieftains of the youth tribes. None had quite the impact on the course of the republic as the political polars. And in the temple of the public opinion, Swenson was the priest of priests. After consulting Penholster's itinerary, Swenson placed his call to the candidate at the Sheraton Blackstone in Chicago at 7:31. Penholster's light, breezy voice, fraught with empathy and yet withal, Swenson felt, a trifle untrustworthy, came on the line promptly. They traded their usual brief amenities. "Okay, Arnold, shoot. I've got my form here." No one called Swenson Arnie, although Penholster had tried it their first day. "All right, Governor. Going across, make it 1050 under A, 772 under B, 178 under C, 52.5 under D, 38.6 under E, 8.9 under F, plus 1.1 under G." For Penholster, the figures translated swiftly as follows. Of the 2,000 most likely to vote people polled across the nation in the last 24 hours, 1,050 said they would vote for Penholster, 772 for Quinn, and 178 did not know. Expressed percentages, Penholster had 52.5, Quinn 38.6, and 8.9 were undecided. Column G, Quinn's gain or loss over the previous day's polling, showed a gain of 1.1%. "Oof," Penholster emitted a half-whistling sound. "I don't like that 1.1 gain, Arnold." "It's not pretty," conceded Swenson. Actually, he thought the number a thing of beauty. No offense to Penholster, just a question of aesthetics. One day 1.2, another 1.1, another an even 1. The column G figure had not varied more than 0.2% since the Penholster-Quinn matching began 8 days ago. "You said you might make a projection today, Arnold." Penholster's tone struck a tentative tone. "I did. Governor, I regret to tell you this," but within him Swenson could feel the fires of elation. "The line crosses at TN squared on your graph." Except for a faint extraneous symphony of far voices, silence overtook the line. "Tuesday, November 2nd, asked Penholster. "Yes, that's election day." "Yes, I know." After a long pause, Penholster said, "Let me get this straight, Arnold. Are you telling me that if things keep rolling as they are, we've got trouble on election day?" "That's about the size of it." And, thought Swenson, he'd known it last night, deep in his brain and his gut, thus beating the poll by 12 hours. Instead of commiserating with the client, he felt like dashing off a happy paper for the American Statistical Association. We have to face the fact that we have a trend. The trend, that ominous and implacable abstraction, had moved as smoothly as a ship on compass heading in calm seas. Starting with 30% of the vote the night of his nomination, Quinn's blue line rose day by day with an average of 1.1% every 24 hours. You actually put the election in doubt, then? It was as though Penholster had asked which day the world would end. "Well, of course, we have the variables. You crank in my average error of 0.4%, you look at places like Chicago, where the organization can influence your tally on the upside." Swenson never used such word as steal or fix with clients. Then you consider Quinn himself. A man given to the, bizarre in campaigning might say something deeply offensive to a statistical important block, or get into a brawl, or perhaps give the impression of mental instability. Well, let's put it this way. The numbers say doubtful, but with the variables, you look in better shape than Quinn does. Any recommendations from the depths? Penholster was braving it now, the cool, imperturbable image. The depth interviews embraced a series of questions asked every fourth person polled. They were intended to probe the voters' psychic caverns for substrata of prejudice, longing, and trust. Sure, said Swenson. As I told you earlier in the week, foreign policy is your trump suit. Let's look at question 6 in the depth interviews. Suppose another war breaks out in the Middle East, threatening world peace. Which candidate would you rather have in the White House handling the crisis? Yesterday, 56.7% said Penholster, only 32.1% said Quinn, and 11.2% were uncertain. Quinn gains only slightly on this question day by day. You retain a big lead there, so the message is loud and clear. I can't understand how I can be so far ahead on the foreign business and still keep dropping overall. It's the old story, Governor. Bread and butter dominate elections, and Quinn has the kitchen image. But it was more than that, Swenson felt. He preferred to stick close to the numbers with clients, but he had his own theories, privately nursed. From the start of September polling, he had sensed a lack of basic trust in Penholster. The governor's image was one of deftness, agility, suppleness. Voters liked him, but they did not trust him deep down as they had Eisenhower, for example. Penholster led the polls because the voters trusted Hudson even less. But with the sudden appearance of Eddie Quinn, the ballgame changed radically in the 7th inning. The initial depth interviews indicated that Quinn's 2 appearances on television projected a picture of independence and integrity of person. People might dispute or even abhor what Eddie said, but they sensed that he was his own man, a solid fellow who would not flutter about in every breeze. In short, people trusted Eddie to be himself. Swenson surmised the second day that Eddie would gain in the polls as people overcame their aversion to the novelty and shock of what he said. If Swenson were explaining this phenomenon to Charlie Heron, who had financed some of Swenson polls in the past, he would put it in bankers' terms. Eddie was the rough, blunt construction foreman without funds, credit standing, or social acceptance, who comes into the bank unannounced and solicits a large loan to start his own building company. He is turned down, but he returns again and again until the banker, persuaded at last of the applicant's ability and stubborn commitment, extends him a character loan and even urges his own wife to invest money in the new enterprise. Eddie began his 19-day campaign by projecting an image of a good, warm, reliable man of the people, and Swenson believed that a man whose initial impression was appealing only rarely failed to gain as the days went on. So the daily tallies showing Eddie on a gradual but steady rise did not surprise Swenson. In fact, he already had waged $2,000 of his own money at attractive long-shot odds. But that was all hunch and theory, and with the client, Swenson stayed glued to the numbers. The depths show your clear superiority on foreign issues, said Swenson. If I were in your shoes, Governor, I'd hit that hard in every speech. Without saying so, I'd make the voters visualize Eddie Quinn at a summit conference with Ribichikov or conferring with Pompidou or Willy Brandt. Voters will feel uneasy, I think, about pictures like that. I agree, Arnold. I sense my strength in that area. I'm going to exploit yesterday's break, the Russians knocking off the talks in Berlin. Anything else? Yes. I think from now on we ought to get a computer printout every 4 hours. It won't cost that much more. Let's say $700 a day, and then we can get a running check on the trend. Okay, do it. And Arnold, call me any time you spot a change. Flo will put you through wherever I am. Ugh, this is hard to take at this hour in the morning. Anything can change, Governor. The numbers aren't ordained in heaven. But once they started to flow in a steady current, thought Swenson, only an act of God could guarantee a reversal. Oh, one thing, Arnold. Quinn had a bad day yesterday. Rain, hippies, a squabble over pot, a crack about a department of offense. Do you break down figures show any change after, say, 9 p.m.? That'll take a minute. Swenson skimmed rows of figures looking for key numbers. Let's see, most of the late numbers are from out west. Well, I can't be definite without more work, but if Quinn hurt himself, it doesn't seem to show up yet. We'll know more later on. Okay, then, until 7:30 tomorrow, unless you have some news. Swenson labored for 2 hours over his master charts, then prepared to walk to the Lexington Avenue headquarters to watch the beginning of the telephone calls at 10 a.m. He loved the clutter of voices amid the rasp of dialing and the busy beat of the tabulating machines, for he knew that beneath the noise, as though in a subterranean channel, the numbers flowed quietly and steadily at a predictable speed toward a foreseen destination. But first Swenson called his friend Don Pugh, his betting blind for wages with the Philadelphia bookie. "Is Quinn still 5-1, Don?" "Yep, no change." "Put another 1,000 on Quinn, then." "Will do. See you, Arnold." Pugh seldom questioned his friend. In their arrangement, by which Pugh picked up 1/10 of the winnings and shared none of the losses, words were superfluous. Hanging up, Penholster sat for several minutes staring at the numbers on his coded form sheet. It's axiomatic that political candidates distrust polls which show them lagging and place great faith in those that depict them running ahead, yet Penholster found himself in the tormenting position of reading results of a poll that showed him in front by landslide proportions, but pondering a pollster's projection which had him winning or losing by a whisker 11 days hence. True, Swenson had an enviable record for accuracy, and Penholster knew that he never made a projection for a client until satisfied that a trend was underway, but how could this be? How could Swenson predict with any certainty that the voters would continue to swing to Eddie Quinn in a fixed percentage day after day? Penholster found it incredible that the American people actually would come close to electing a man who scattered outrageous remarks around the countryside, who had no qualifications for high office, and who offered thin, naive, simplistic remedies for the most complex social ailments. Still, those numbers. Quinn, 38.6%, up 1.1% from yesterday, 2.2 points from Wednesday, 3.2 from Tuesday, 4.4 from Monday, 5.4 from Sunday, 6.6 from Saturday, 7.6 from Friday, and 8.6 from Thursday night after Quinn's nomination. The numbers rang through Penholster's memory. There was something immutable and changeless and therefore evil about the progression. If Eddie suddenly proposed today that the State Department be shut down and all foreign policy abolished, and who could guarantee that he wouldn't, would he still gain 1.1% tomorrow in Swenson's poll? Not a man given to self-pity, Penholster nevertheless began to feel sorry for himself now. They were unfair, those ever-growing numbers, a naked, deformed parade marching straight ahead, oblivious of anything Penholster might do or say. He walked about the Blackstone living room, gazed down on Michigan Avenue, and tried to think about broad strategy for the 11 remaining days before those goddamn red and blue lines met at their unholy rendezvous. He called Flo Hendricks, already at work in her room, and asked her to locate Eddie Quinn for him. The rival candidate, she said, was in Terre Haute, Indiana, and would move out within the hour. She would try to get him on the line. It made sense, Penholster thought as he sipped his second cup of coffee while awaiting the call. The briefing, the film, the numbers, especially the numbers. Of course, he didn't believe them any more than he believed in the prediction of Swenson's prophecy. Still, if there was even the slightest chance that Eddie Quinn might be elected president, then the poor bastard ought to be prepared before the moon and the stars, as Harry Truman had put it, fell on him. The call came through in 5 minutes. "Commissioner, this is Hugh Penholster. Good morning." "How are you, Governor?" "Fine. How's it going with you?" "Lousy." Eddie sounded as though he meant it. "We got rained out yesterday. This morning, more water, and I'm running a temperature. Well, that's my problem. Your call surprised me, though. What can I do for you?" "I thought we might save the government some money and get to meet with each other in the bargain. When's your CIA briefing?" "Monday, I think." "Yeah, the director is going to meet us in L.A. Monday." "Well, why don't we take the briefing together?" asked Penholster. "It's logical. That way we both hear the same thing, and it ought to be clear that the sticky areas we ought to avoid for the rest of the campaign." "Where do you want to do this?" Eddie was cautious. "Where are you Sunday?" "Let me think. Oklahoma City? The Scriven?" I'll be in St. Louis where I was supposed to be briefly. I'll be in St. Louis where I was supposed to be brief Sunday afternoon. Why don't I just hop over to Oklahoma City Sunday afternoon and let the director brief both of us at once? Well, I'm not sure what's on your schedule. Look, Commissioner, I'm not trying to trap you. To be perfectly frank, in addition to the briefing, there are a couple of things I want to talk to you about. From your standpoint, some bad news and some good news, we might say. Eddie cleared his suffering throat. Is this like the story of the school principal who calls a father and says, I've got some bad news and some good news for you? The bad news is that we've discovered your son is a fag. The good news is that he's just been elected Queen of May. They both laughed. Penholster countered with a bad and good news story of his own, then said, Well, both stories might fit, according to your point of view. Why don't you think over the CIA idea and call me back? No, Eddie said. I think it's okay. Let's do it. How would 4 o'clock be? Fine. I'll make the arrangements with the agency, and I'll see you Sunday over at the Skirvin. Okay. Look forward to meeting you, Governor. Likewise. 2 hours later, Penholster was addressing a teachers' convention in the Conrad Hilton across the street from the Blackstone and imploring the delegates to consider just who you want occupying the White House when the war clouds threaten over the China Sea and Arab leaders meet once more to plot the destruction of Israel. Yet every time he paused for breath, it wasn't a handy phrase, but the number 1.1 that flashed into his mind. Eddie Quinn was rolling west through southern Illinois in the Electra 225 and listening to his whine of tires on the drying pavement of Interstate 70. His thoughts held no numbers. Instead, he pondered his talk for the next stop, the town of Effingham, where he planned to say that if elected president, he would order every prison warden, administrator, and guard under his control to spend a minimum of 2 months as inmates of other penitentiaries before resuming their duties, and that, Eddie planned to say, would bring needed prison reform quicker than a ton of articles and resolutions.